Today's story is a Nagaland folktale about Momola, a girl who became a mermaid. Also featuring a river that flooded a village just to take revenge, and a terrible misunderstanding at a family reunion about what's on the dinner menu. Welcome to Stories from India. This is a podcast that will take you on a journey through the rich mythology, folklore, and history of the Indian subcontinent. I am Narad Muni, the celestial storyteller and the original Time Lord. With my ability to travel through space and time, I can bring you fascinating stories from the past, the present, and the future. From the epic tales of the Mahabharata and Ramayana to the folk tales of the Panchatantra, to stories of Akbar Birbal and Tenali Raman, I have a story for every occasion. The purpose of the stories is neither to pass judgment nor to indoctrinate. My goal is only to share these stories with people who may not have heard them before, and to make them more entertaining for those who have. Before we begin today's episode, I just want to celebrate a little something. According to FeedSpot, which is a podcast ranking site, the number one Indian mythology podcast is this one. And that was only possible because of your support. So a hearty thank you to all of you for your love, support, and your feedback. Check out the link in the show notes and on the site sfipodcast.com to see FeedSpot's rankings. Now, on to today's show. In this episode, we are doing a folktale from the eastern state of Nagaland. It's about a girl who, against her wishes, has to marry a river. The offspring from a union between a human and a river are fish, of course. And the human gets changed into a mermaid, if you hadn't already guessed that. The story begins with a young girl, whose name was Momola. She lived with her mother, whose name was Azuo. In sticking to the tradition of naming characters on the show, the names represent the roles they play. Azuo means mother in Nagaland. And on this fine and sunny day, Azuo and Momola were going to have a little mother-daughter time together. You could argue that they were already living together and spending every waking moment together. So, what was so special or different about mother-daughter time? But that's not the way they saw it. So, it was perfectly fine for them to be going fishing together, just as they had gone to watch the Hornbill Festival yesterday, and the Kene or Naga wrestling match the day before, or the concert the day before that. And today's fishing promised to be very rewarding. Everyone in town had been talking about how the fish in the river were really jumping. And when an angler came by, rumor had it that the fish would come to fisticuffs to compete for the bait's attention. Azuo noted that if the rumor were true, the fish would be eager to jump into their creel, which was just a basket used to catch and store fish. Her daughter was excited. She loved fish in all forms: fried, baked, salted, grilled, with a side of fries, without a side of fries. But Momola was a cautious girl. "Let's not count our rooster fish before they are catched." Her mother promptly corrected her. "Caught, not catched." She added that if Momola was deliberately aiming to make a joke, it wasn't all that funny. But it was understandable. Given the absence of a dad in Momola's life, no wonder she wasn't making good dad jokes. "Well, never mind," Azuo added. One of these days, she would get some of Momola's uncles and their families to visit. Maybe that might help her learn. Despite Momola's initial caution, by the time they got to the riverside, both the mother and daughter's mouths were watering at the prospect of all the fish that they were going to eat for lunch and dinner and probably breakfast the next day. But when they looked around, the riverbank was practically empty. Having heard all the stories of abundance of fish, they were surprised that there wasn't a delegation from the Limca Book of Records to ensure that a record was indeed being broken here. That should have seemed a little fishy to them. Momola speculated that maybe they needed to offer the river a loaf of bread or something. She heard some guy in the Middle East did it and got a cart full of fish for it. He got all famous before they nailed him to a cross or something. Azuo shook her head and decided that world history was another thing her daughter needed to learn. She would line up a teacher for that too. Momola's aunts knew all kinds of stories. What with all this need for free coaching from uncles and aunts, Azuo began thinking that this was going to turn into a regular family reunion. Maybe Azuo would need to manufacture a special occasion for all of Momola's uncles and aunts to gather. Anyway, back to the river and why the fish were all missing. Azuo and Momola used their best bait, but there wasn't a single bite. Momola's face grew long, and Azuo couldn't bear to see that. So, she did what she knew usually worked in such circumstances. Azuo prayed. She prayed to the river, but she knew the river wasn't a god who would provide blessings and superpowers in exchange for nothing. This river was a purely transactional creature. It would want something in exchange. She had already offered bait, and that was refused. So she upped her stakes. She offered to pray to the river every day, but the river still seemed skeptical. So then Azuo raised her offer to a terrible extent. She promised Momola's hand in marriage to the river. That worked. There was a sudden tsunami of fish that all washed ashore at their feet. They were all kinds and colors, and Momola and her mother were delighted. Amidst the joy of receiving all that fish, they completely forgot that Momola had just gotten engaged to the river. And later, basking in the sun, after a hearty meal of fish stew, the promise of marriage was just a distant thought. But they found out that calling off an engagement to the river is not that simple. Momola's mother tried to talk to the river and explained that her daughter couldn't actually marry a river. She had only done it for the fish. Besides, it was a ridiculous idea. Imagine, how could they even have the ceremony? How would the bride and groom even communicate with each other? So, wouldn't the river please just run along and find a nice river to join up to? She had heard of the Blue Nile and the White Nile. Best match ever. The river was sure to find a match, a partner that was the same species at least. But the river did not like that answer. It rose in height and continued doing so. Momola and her mom looked on in horror as they realized that the river was getting dangerously close to flooding their village. They rushed for higher ground, and so did all the other villages. They landed at the peaks of 3 local mountains, along with some of their cattle, perfectly as they had rehearsed in their emergency evacuation fire drills. The animals were also carefully selected. They had a pair of each species. At that point, the river did not rise any further. Azuo screamed at the river. There was standing room only on what was left of the mountain peaks, so she had 1 foot on the peak and the other in the river. You could say that she was trampling down on the treacherous river, but that might not be a very accurate description. Azuo screamed her question. What did the river want exactly? And the river answered. Mo, 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 was the sound it seemed to make. Don't stutter. I haven't got all day. If you want momos, I can't help you. You just flooded my kitchen, and everyone else's kitchen, and all the restaurants in the village. Go order momos on Swiggy yourself, Azuo said. Momola, the river said. But the last syllable might have been a mispronunciation when it intended to say Momomo again. Well, clearly, that answered Azuo's question about communication earlier. The river seemed to be able to speak to some degree. Azuo was in no mood to agree. She was going to put her foot down. The foot that was in the river, of course. But the rest of the village gave her a stern look upon realizing that they were in this predicament because Azuo had double-crossed the river. So, societal pressure piled on, and finally, Azuo gave in. The marriage would happen as promised. No one bothered asking Momola for her opinion, though. Yeah, it was that kind of a century. But then, when Azuo turned around and looked through the crowd, Momola wasn't there. She had gone missing. In fact, the last time Azuo had seen Momola was right before the river stopped rising. Azuo waded into the river and swam frantically around their little mountain peak-turned island. And then she checked the other 2 mountain peaks-turned islands as well. But there was no sign of Momola. In desperation, she swam back in the direction of the village and where the original river bank stood. And that's when she saw the monsters. There were 2 of them. Enormous, human-sized fish. Actually, no. Only one of them appeared to be a human-sized fish. The other was a human-sized, half-human, half-fish. A mermaid. And the mermaid's top half was recognizable. It was Momola. Holy carp! What have they done to you? I'm going to save you, Azuo screamed and rushed for the other fish. No, Mom, stop. We are friends, Momola replied. And Azuo realized that suddenly she could understand her daughter speaking mermaidese. Or maybe her daughter had swallowed a babblefish. But more important matters first. Friends, you say, Momola? With friends like these, who needs anemones? Momola didn't care. She said that she had found true love. She was the river's bride now, and this fish was just her bodyguard. She was happy and contented, and she would visit Azuo every chance she got. Maybe like on her 50th birthday, which was just around the corner, coming up in only 5 or 6 years. Becoming a mermaid had transformed Momola. Of course, that's pretty obvious, but what I mean is that it had transformed her psychologically as well, not just physically. And Azuo came to the sad realization that now she was all alone. It was not like she could go live with her daughter anytime she wanted. That might have been possible if her daughter had been married to a regular human being living on land. But Azuo now resigned to her fate, because it looked like Momola was indeed happy. Azuo did manage to have somewhat regular contact with her daughter though. Often, she'd gather worms and take them to the riverbank and scatter them there. But the big family reunion only happened around Azuo's 50th birthday. Uncles and aunts came from far and wide. A long time ago, they were supposed to teach Momola a lot of things. Now, they were just here as rude party guests. Momola thought that it was a little insensitive that the menu at this party included fish, crab, lobsters, and shrimp. Momola had arrived there with her children. Her children were completely fish-like in appearance, though you might have expected them to be 3/4 fish and a quarter human. Momola's fish children could talk like humans. I guess that ability was passed down with Momola's genes. Apparently, she had named her children Nemo and Dory. The relation to the Disney Pixar movies was purely coincidental. Besides, this story took place centuries before Disney was even founded. Dory tugged on Momola's fin and said, "Look, Mom, there's my friend, Krusty the Crab. He goes to school with me. Why is he lying there on a plate with those sliced vegetables and fruits around him? And there's my other friend, Lobby the Lobster. He seems to be almost sleeping in that hot bath that someone kindly put him in." Momola decided that she needed to have a very serious conversation with Azuo about all the seafood on the menu. Meanwhile, she left Nemo and Dory to hang around in a little aquarium. Momola found Azuo and convinced her to see it from her point of view. Azuo said that it was too late now. Most of the other guests had already eaten. But more importantly, where were her grandchildren? Azuo was eager to see Nemo and Dory. She had never even seen them before. So Momola went off to fetch them. But when she got to the aquarium, she was shocked to see that it was empty. She ran around frantically, searching for her children. But finding Nemo and finding Dory was hard. What made it especially so was that Momola still had the tail of a fish, so navigating on land wasn't very easy. She reached the area where her uncles and aunts were gathered. They were all laughing and having fun. One of her closest uncles, Azuo's oldest brother, made a remark at that point to the crowd that the clownfish tasted funny and the blue tang was tasty, and both seemed like they were angling to be eaten. The crowd laughed, but Momola's heart sank. She found the plates and realized that her children had indeed been eaten up. She asked if any trace remained of her poor kids. But no, her uncles and aunts had eaten the bones too. Except they were two tiny bones, one from Nemo and the other from Dory. Momola's oldest aunt refused to part with those. She was saving them for the cat, she said. But Momola flew into a rage and demanded her bones back. When she got them, it became clear what she wanted with those. You see, Momola had learned a bit of magic from the river. She couldn't do much herself, but she gave it her best shot. And it worked. Kind of. From the bones, she was able to create Nemo and Dory again and breathe life into them. But they were tiny, bite-sized, she thought to herself, and immediately shuddered at her choice of words. She rushed home with her children because some of the other relatives were already eyeing her children with a gluttonous eye. The river naturally wondered why Nemo and Dory looked smaller than they had this morning. Momola said that it was because her uncles were hurt from not having met her for so long. You see, there's a belief in that particular Chang tribe in Nagaland that uncles must not be hurt or bad things will happen. Well, the river simply accepted it and moved on. Actually, as a river, it was always moving on. So nothing surprising there. Momola didn't really go back to her human family after that. At least, not the uncles and aunts. But rumor has it that she kept meeting Azuo at least. Because Azuo was the sole person who understood the pain a mother experiences when she finds she has lost her child. That's it for this time. A few notes. In the original story, Momola had only one child, who was a monkfish. But I couldn't resist the Nemo and Dory reference, so I made it two. The Chang tribe do not hunt the monkfish, as they believe these are humans who have been transformed into fish. As mentioned earlier, check out FeedSpot's podcast rankings. Stories from India is at the top of the list of the best Indian mythology podcasts. Thank you once again for all your support in making this happen. I've had some people independently ask me for a story of Shiva, and others request a story about the origin of yoga. So in the next episode, we'll do a story about both. Because, you see, Shiva has something to do with yoga's origin. How exactly? Wait till next week to find out. Thank you all for your comments on social media and on Spotify's Q&A. I can't directly reply to the questions there, but I'll address them here on this show. Vaishnavi, Rajul, Bala, Juhi, Hariprasad, Vamshi, Amit, Dr. Krishna and Anu, thank you so much for your kind words of support. It means a lot to me. Meghna, thank you for the lovely feedback. I think your daughter might possibly be my youngest listener. Juhi, thank you for bringing up something I missed mentioning. There is indeed a temple dedicated to Barbarik in Rajasthan and another in Gujarat near Ahmedabad. Barbarik is known by a couple of different names in those states, Khatu Sham and Baliyadev. Hari Prasad, thank you for the feedback, and I'll get to the episode on Ramanujacharya soon. Many of you have asked to go back to the Ramayana, to Chandrakanta, to Akbar Birbal, and to Vikram Betal. So I'll be doing all of those as well. Navya, thank you for the suggestion on Kanaklata. I'll work on that story as well in an upcoming episode. Rez and Amit, noted your feedback, and I'll try and create a few more bonus episodes from time to time. Vamsi, good question regarding episode 208. The folktale doesn't really say anything other than that Dayani was expelled from home and from the village. But knowing that she was in her advanced years, it's unlikely that she slowly raised other young girls over several years and lured them into a false sense of security before brutally murdering them. Also, Vamsi noted your request to hear about the god of time. In Indian mythology, there are actually multiple gods and goddesses who can control time. You could even count myself in that, seeing how I'm practically a Time Lord, able to leap back and forth whenever I want. But what I can do is cover a very interesting time travel story from Indian mythology, and it features Balram's father-in-law. If you have any other comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories that you'd like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com, or tweet at sfipodcast, or reply to the questions on Spotify's Q&A. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.